All right, so today's demonstration, we're going to be looking at the next Blender exercise for Blender tools and operations. And for this particular exercise, we're going to be looking at how to use modification tools inside of the Blender interface to edit our models, transform them, adjust with selection tools, change different modes, and work with some other tools to create and make and reshape forms inside of the system. Last time we looked at how to get into the interface and how to import models into the scene and reshape them based on scale, basic scale, rotation, and positioning. So we're going to build on that with today's exercise. All right. So to get started, we need to import or open up our scene that we saved last time. So I'm going to go to File, Open. And I'm going to locate my in-progress Blender file. I'm just going to open that back up where we finished off last time. And again, where we finished last time, we were just positioning our character inside of our cyclorama scene. Again, just as a couple notes on that, when you imported the cyclorama, you really don't have to make any changes to it. It's already sized up pretty well to work in the environment. It's just a matter of positioning your character inside 3D space to be positioned on top of it, or inside of it at least. So we have all that kind of rigged. And the parts that I want to look at today deal with, again, sort of working with modifying the model. So I want to start off by showing you some of the different editing modes and modes that you can access inside of Blender for doing that. So I'm going to have my character model selected on screen. And you can either click directly on it or use the outliner panel over here on the upper right to select your character. If you haven't changed any preferences inside of Blender or inside the computer, if you're working in a lab, remember the lab mouse in here has it has a 2-button feature, but if you don't reassign the right mouse button, you lose the functionality in the system. And it does make it harder to select items inside of Blender when your mouse doesn't work correctly. If you need to adjust your mouse settings, then you need to go into Preferences for the computer, System Preferences, and work with that to fix that part. But that is helpful to make that adjustment. Yeah, question? You can't open it. You have to import it. Yeah. Like that's what we did last time was you have to import individual model files. They can't just be opened inside of 3D software because opening in a 3D program assumes that you're opening the format for the scene that you're working in, which is a .blend file. But instead, you would go to File, Import inside of Blender, and then you would choose the OBJ option if it's an OBJ object or an STL. All right, so we've got our character, with your character selected in your scene, what we're going to do, and you don't even have to have the character, if you're just playing around and not even working with this part, with the cyclorama up, you can have an object to do all this stuff with that we're about to do. But we're going to switch our mode for editing in here. Right now we've been working in what's called object mode. If you notice along the lower menu inside of Blender, your lower 3D menu has that orange cube icon and it says object mode next to it. That's the basic mode for translating, moving, and rotating objects. But if you click on that button, you can also access some other modes. There are really only 2 other ones that I want you to focus on in terms of playing with in this project, and we'll look at those today. Edit and Sculpt. So we're going to start in Edit. So switch to Edit mode down at the bottom. And when you turn on edit mode, whatever object you currently have selected from object mode is probably going to show up bright orange in your scene. The reason it looks bright orange is that indicates that it has selected on the surface all of the individual polygons that make up that structure. So when you're looking at a character very specifically has lots of polygon structures that make the surface so complex and detailed. That's why it looks the way it does when you look at your 3D model that's scanned. So what we can do though in edit mode is quite a bit actually. There's a lot of functionality that we can use to edit and manipulate this model at this stage for tweaking it. Is specifically what I think editing mode is really good for fine-tune editing of like individual faces, polygons, or vertex points that make up your model. So instead of having everything selected right now, let's go ahead and we can deselect everything by hitting A on the keyboard. And what that'll do is that'll unselect everything, which makes your model probably look dark if you're working with a really complex image like this one on screen right now. And what we get to do after that is we get to make our own selections on top of the object. So that's just hitting A for deselection under edit mode. So here are some of the tools and things that you can find specific to edit mode that I want to point out. First thing you should notice when you switch between object mode and edit mode is that some tools change inside the system to make it to make other tools available for editing. So if I go back to object mode real quick, we have this long host of icons and options down across the lower menu. But when I switch to edit, we get a slightly different subset of selection tools that are available along the lower menu. And I want to look at a few of those before we go forward. The first of them being this little group of gray kind of looking cube icons that are all lined up down here. Each of these little icons has like a different orange shaded region on them. These basically indicate selection options that you can make for a model that's currently on screen. I'm going to zoom in towards my model so I can see some details. And you may notice on my screen I'm working with the quad view turned off for a moment. So you can turn off quad with Alt or Control Option Q, or you can go to your View menu from the 3D menu and flip off the toggle quad from there. But I'm doing that. I'm just going to zoom in on my model a little bit so I can see some of the polygon structure on the surface. And again, you can use plus or minus to do that. If your camera is off angle, you can hold down Shift and scroll your mouse wheel, or you can hold down Control and scroll your mouse wheel to pan your camera left and right or up and down. So use those to recenter your screen in case you're zooming in and out, because zooming always zooms towards the center of your viewport, always. All right. So now that I'm kind of zoomed in on the surface, I want to go back to those three little gray cube icons across the bottom. So each of them allows you to select different elements for an object depending on which one is turned on. And if I click on any of these cubes, the options change. So the first little cube allows me to select independent points on the surface of my material or my object. So if I go in and click on any of these points on screen with vertex edit or vertex selection on, I can grab individual points. Now make sure you're using the correct selection method with your mouse to do this. Again, if your whole model is still orange, you need to deselect it with A, and that way you can come in and actually grab individual points. You can, again, if you haven't changed your mouse options, you may have to right click instead of left click to make a selection. Just be aware of that. But as you click around, you should notice that you can highlight an anchor or a vertex point that you can manipulate on screen. And it gives you a little widget on any given point so that you can actually stretch or move that point around, so that you can manipulate it. You can also do other things, like you can hold down the shift key and you can grab multiple points on screen if you want to. And that'll have them all selected together if you hold shift and click around. And then you can move them all at once. Now when you start moving things, this is where like the 4 other views starts becoming helpful. But this just kind of shows you how to make the quick selection though. So that's what the first little cube box does at the bottom. That's individual vertex selection. If you select the next little cube box, this one does line segments or edges. And so now I can click on any line point connected by 2 vertex points. So any line segment can be selected. And again, if you hold down shift, you can grab multiple line segment areas to move them around at the same time. Again, make sure when you're doing that, you may have to use, like I said, you may have to use right click instead of left click if you haven't changed your mouse options on the computer or inside of Blender. But that's doing line segment selection. The last one does what's called faces. So that's actually grabbing a whole polygon structure. When you activate face selection, which is the cube with the giant orange face on it, that one actually changes the look of your model on screen to showing all these little dots centered over each polygon. So you can click on each one and you can actually manipulate the whole polygon and any connected edges that are connected to that particular group of imagery. So you can make some very bizarre kind of fine-tune edits, again, is what this tool does when you're in edit mode. A good thing to know, if you want to be able to select like multiple types of things at once and you don't just want to grab faces, edges, or just vertex points, you can hold down shift and click on each of those little squares and it will have them all turned on so that if you start selecting stuff on screen, it will actually grab like a face with all of its interconnected edges and lines at the same time. That way you get like a more full or more accurate selection made. And that's just holding down shift and activating all 3 of those options at the same time. But again, if you need to do more fine-tune edits, you may need to turn some of them off and only use one at a time. Again, depending on what you're doing. But again, this allows you to do kind of fine tip stuff. So if you need to push or pull a section of your model in or out, that can be helpful with these specific tools right here. Some other things that are available to you that I want to point out are over here on the left tool tab on your screen. So if you look at your tool tab now, we have completely new options available in here, past the section that says transform. Transform is still pretty basic. It does give you some new options like shrink and flatten or push and pull. And some of those do very different elemental moves with your designs inside the scene. Here, let me do something real quick. I'm going to add I'm just going to add a basic cube to the scene to show you a couple things here. Back to edit mode. Okay. So with things like shrink and flatten, if you have a specific 3D face active, you can click on shrink and flatten to resize the surface based on that one part of it. You can also use push and pull to taper the object or that selection of faces that you have active on screen. So you can actually shrink. Basically what it's doing is shrinking or growing the selected item that you're working with towards its center. So you can very quickly make like a pyramid with a cube. And that's working with like push and pull. And again, shrink and flatten just allows you to push or pull that particular item in and out of the shape. Some of the other options that you have that are kind of cool are listed down below that for the little the section that says add, and then it's got a whole slew of little options for you to play with. A few of these can do very interesting things to your model. Among them, the first being extrude. Extrude is kind of a typical term in 3D for being able to extend a selection into space. So right now, if I wanted to extend this side of this pyramid structure out into space, either A, what I could do is just pull on it and try to do this, but notice as I pull on it that it grabs all the neighboring connected parts and sort of distorts it. Well, if I don't want to do that, I could actually tell it to just take this little selection and pop it straight out from the object to extend it. So I can use extrude to do that. So I'm going to use extrude from this top black option up here. And I'm going to click on that and go down to individual faces. And I'm going to click on that and then move my mouse and push on it. And what it does is it literally extends that particular selected element out into space. Kind of adds to it in a sense and stretches it out. So I can actually pull it inward or push it outward. And notice that it pushes it in a specific locked direction when you do that. It's moving it along what's called a normal for a model. A normal is basically understood as a perpendicular line that shoots out from the face of a polygon. So whatever direction that perpendicular line is going to be aimed out at, that's the direction that extruding will follow, usually. And then once you click, it disengages and drops and lets go of the extrude. But this is pretty cool if you want to kind of quickly come in and do some various extruding like to your object. You don't have to use individual faces. You can use that when you have multiple sides selected. So if I take my model, for instance, and let's say I want to work with my model instead. If I have the whole model selected and I use extrude individual faces, this is what's going to happen. It's going to take a second to calculate. But what it allows you to do is actually pull all the polygon structures off of your model and make every polygon, because they were all selected when I did it. And again, it's taking a moment to calculate because there's a lot of little faces being pulled. But here, let me click to release it and show you what it actually looks like. So this is the change that I just made to this crazy model. I have literally taken every polygon on its surface and stretched it out from its original location. So it kind of looks like a big koosh ball. And that's what extruding does. Again, it's just extending a polygon into space in some way. And you can do it as many times as you want, or as little as you prefer. Let me go back into edit. And it's good, a good thing to do when you've done edits like that, it's good to flip between object mode and edit mode to see your work, especially if the design element is really complex like your figure that has a lot of pieces. The preview and edit mode is not very effective. And so that's when it's good to flip to object mode to deal with that. So that's what extruding does. Again, each of them do a slightly different edit to the model or the region that you have selected in your design. So it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that particular design element. All right. Some of the other things that you can play with underneath the edit menu besides extruding, which can be a lot of fun. There are also things here where you can literally cut and design individual polygon shapes on the surface of a model. So for instance, if I select this face right here on my model, I can use this option under Add that says Select. And when I turn on Select, it gives me what looks like a little knife tool for my mouse. And what I can do with it is sort of draw a basic polygon structure on top of a selected face that I have on my scene. So it shows little green dots to indicate where I'm allowed to draw. And it works kind of like the pen tool in Illustrator. So if I click, it'll drop a point and then extend a point out from it. And I can draw with it to make either incomplete shapes, or I can close it in to make a complete form by moving it back to where I started, and then hit return to complete the work. And notice what it did when I did that. It uses it like a cut command, so it literally cut a hole into the surface of my object in the shape that I just made. Kind of fun. That's just using select. A lot of these little tools down here by select work the same way. Knife and Knife Project work similarly. You also have some other tools that are listed down below that for remove. So this is where you can literally remove individual polygons from the structure. So if I want to delete this entire face off of my model, I can just, again, select the item that I want to get rid of, and go under remove and use delete. And then it gives you options for what you want to delete. And you just need to realize what it is that you have selected. So I have a face selected, so I can actually use delete faces. And now that I've cut it off, it literally cuts the wall off of the object, making it look hollow on the inside. And so I can see straight into my object now. So that's what deleting parts of it will do, specifically when you delete faces. All right. Another good feature to know about, if you have a surface that's not very complex, but you want to make it more rounded off or more complex structure and break it into more polygons to edit. Like let's say I want to take my kind of weird cube kind of looking shape here, and I want to give it more edges to edit on top of. Well, underneath that same add section for the tool tab, there's something called subdivide. And subdivide, if you click on that, it will literally break whatever selected items you have on screen into sub-polygon structures. You definitely don't want to do this on your model. Let me just warn you, because subdivision will break every polygon into 4 more parts, and that makes your model like 4 times as complicated in detail as it was, which could overrun your computer. So it's good to do it with individual sections or selections of things if it's really complex. But if it's simple, then it's easy enough to select the whole thing and break it up into a bunch of pieces. And now the cool thing is, now I've got all these little ridges and edges that I can make adjustments to. A shortcut for extrude, by the way, is E on your keyboard. So if you ever just want to do it to something you have selected, you can just hit the E key and then move your mouse, and it will extrude a form or a shape based on, again, its normal on screen. So you can very quickly make bizarre interconnected structures that way. Okay. So that's just kind of working around with the basic tool command section for editing. They have some fun ones in there if you're trying to get more erratic kind of looking design elements. You can use they have one here that's actually called randomize under the deform section for the mesh tools. And so randomize, if you click on that a bunch, it starts to literally twist and augment all of your modeling components the more you push it, until you get something really crazy and distorted looking on screen. And that's what happens when you hit randomize a few times, right? You get something that looks like a pile of garbage at some point. It's kind of entertaining. But it's a great way to create kind of digitized abstraction if that's what you're going for at any point. Okay, so back in. Again, there are a number of other tools you can play with in here that can do interesting things. I'm not necessarily going to go over all of them right now, but to give you a taste of a few of them is important. Whenever you're in edit mode, Blender does give you the ability to add more shapes to your scene. You do have to be aware of one possible problem with that. If I add or create new shapes, if I use like the Create tab while I'm in edit mode, and let's say I add like a sphere. That sphere, technically in your design, is now a part or grouped with whatever element you were just editing already. So this crazy polygon structure that I have on screen that's all sorts of funky abstraction, my sphere image that I just added is now a part of that same layer too. So if I exit edit mode, both of those objects stay selected at the same time no matter what, because they're both joined in the same group together. And it also looks that way in your outliner panel in the upper right. Your cube is just listed. There's no cube and sphere listed. So you want to be careful when you're doing things like that. I recommend when you're doing those kinds of edits to not add additional objects while in edit mode. Just add objects while you're in object mode. All right. Let me see if there's anything else I want to show you that's in here right now. Yeah, I think we'll be okay with that much in here for now. Okay, so that's what you can do as far as working with the tool panel tab on the sidebar. Other options that you'll find for edit mode are down below on the 3D menu. So down here where we clicked on edit mode, we now have a button that says mesh. And if you click on mesh, this gives you access to a lot of other controls we've sort of played with, but some of them are more categorized specifically in here. So we still have a transform menu listed under here. It does give us the shrink and flatten, push and pull options that are listed. We also have listed inside the mesh menu, extrude is listed there with its options. And then we have this little bracketed section that includes things like faces, edges, and vertices. And so this is just an extended area for you to edit those specific options to work with your specific element on screen based on an edge or a vertex that you have selected. So they have lots of different little options that you can play with inside of those. Like if I have a set of faces selected for a model on screen, or if it's just one or two faces or whatever, I can go under that mesh menu, go to faces, and inside here, I can actually make adjustments. Like I can tell it to triangulate that face, and so it breaks that face down into triangular sections where possible. Or I can also tell it to break them up into quads. So I can take it to tris to quads, and it'll try to do its best with that surface. At some point, the design of the surface you're working on just can't be broken into certain shapes beyond triangles. And that's a few things that you have listed in here. There are some other odd options like deleting loose geometry. Like if you have floating pieces of polygons floating around, you can use cleanup to help clear up some of those options. But that's what you can find inside this area. You still have your select options available down here. Again, select is more important inside the edit view than it is in the object view, in my opinion. So if you go under the select menu down at the bottom, your two main tools for selecting under there are going to be either circle select or border select. And if you use circle just as a reference point here, I'm going to go to circle select. And when you come out into your window, it should have your mouse with a round white circle around it. This tool really works best when you're working with one main viewing window instead of the quad port view. But when you come out, you can click and drag the tool over various polygons to add them to your selection. And so it will continue to add them on as you work around your model. Now, again, with this tool, if you want to deactivate it, you have to in order to do anything else in Blender. So you can hit Escape after you're done selecting, and it'll disengage the tool. And then you can do whatever adjustments to the model you need to after that. And that's how you can work with selections. Border select is a little bit different. If you use border select, it'll actually allow you to click and draw like a little selection screen area, rectangular window, and it will grab anything that falls inside of that window based on the viewing angle that you're currently on. If you ever want it to be able to select all the way through the object, instead of just selecting polygons from the side you can see your object on, there's an icon down below on your 3D menu bar, right next to the three little cube icons. And it looks like two little overlapping flat squares that have little white circles on each corner. That icon will allow you to change the selection. With it on, it limits your selection to whatever is visible through your viewer, but if you turn it off, you can see straight through your object, and that means that you can select with your selection tools, and it will select straight through the object out the other side. And so then what you get is a completely selected object on screen. All right, and that's some of the things you can do while you're inside of edit mode. All right, so that's edit mode. Again, fine-tuned selection is what that particular mode is really good for. The next mode I'd like to show you, this one's a little more organic and a little more freeform, called sculpt mode. So let's go back down to where it says edit mode and click on that, and let's change it to sculpt mode this time. All right, now sculpt mode is kind of entertaining. I'm going to make sure that my character is selected for this edit. What sculpt mode will give you is the ability to literally carve and drag surfaces around on your model, again, like a person who works with clay might do. It works a lot like that with this tool. So here's how you can kind of play around with it. First thing you should notice when you go into sculpt mode is that your left-hand menu tabs change. So your first tools tab is now set to the brush object that you're currently using to draw with. The cool thing is you can change it. It starts on default for the basic sculpt draw tool, but if you click on the picture icon for this, you can grab any number of different brushes that are designed and listed inside this menu. So you have a little bit of everything, stuff that'll make blobs, work the surface like clay, pushing and pulling options, bubbles, scrapers, twisters, all kinds of crazy stuff is listed under here. I'll show you how one or two of them work because they all work similarly, they just do kind of a different effect to the surface. So I'll start with the basic one here and work on my model with it. And again, make sure that your model that you want to do sculpting to is actually selected inside of your outliner. But once you get it up, now we come out over the model, and our mouse should have like a little faint red circle around it to indicate the size of the brush tool we're using. And if you zoom in on your model surface, you can actually click and drag across the surface, and it will start to create changes to the model surface immediately. Now, what's interesting about it is it will do what's, by automated feature, it will do whatever the brush is meant to do. The default one sort of makes this bubble surface sort of pop out on the model. Based on how much polygon density you have in your model, the effect will be greater. But by default, it'll do it in a fashion that's called symmetry. So it'll do the same design element on the opposite side of the axis of the model, which we can turn off and on if we want to. A lot of people use this kind of feature when they're doing character design inside of 3D modeling, so that as you design the character for generic purposes, it looks the same on both sides, like designing the head of a dragon or some other type of character, again, that looks symmetrical down the middle. The Sculpt tool does a great job at that with symmetry turned on. But this is what that basic tool does. Again, it allows you to do these kinds of bizarre tweaks and twists to your model. And the more that you kind of click and drag over a section, the more enhanced the effect becomes on the surface of your model based on the angle of the viewport that you're working in. So when you're working with one of these tools, you should notice over on the left in the Tool tab that you have options that you can manipulate to adjust the options for the brush. So radius is the first slider. And by the way, when you see options in Blender that look like this sort of gray bar cutoff sort of thing, this is a slider that you can click and drag your mouse over to change the values for. So for where it says radius, you can click and drag on the word radius to drag that bar to change the size of the brush tool that you're using. So the smaller the radius, the smaller the brush area will be for detail. Strength also determines how much push or pull the particular brush effect has on the object. So more strength means more instantaneous results. If you slide down a little bit, you'll see that there's a button here to do adding or subtractive brushwork. So additive means it will continue to add the effect. Subtract means it will dig holes into the surface instead of creating sort of lumpy objects. So you can literally carve back into a surface to switch the way that it appears on screen, which again can get pretty bizarre pretty quickly. Depending on how you're working with your model. Now again, I've been doing all this editing on top of my character model. If you've been trying to edit on top of a cube, the cube may not be doing a whole lot for you. And that's because the cube doesn't have a lot of polygons on the structure. You may have to subdivide it in edit mode a couple times to give yourself some things to work with. But if you don't, that's okay. There's a cool option we can change inside of the Sculpt tool in order for it to break up the surface of a polygon automatically to get the effect. So go down, if you keep scrolling down on the Tool tab on the left, there's some other options here I want to point out. One of them is called Dyn Topo or Dyn Topo. If you expand that option down, that's actually short for dynamic topology. And that basically means the ability to make a surface malleable or transformable. So if you enable dynamic topology, what that gives you access to is the ability to carve with greater detail into your model. So if I zoom in on my character over here a little bit, dynamic topologies automatically has like a detail size that you can work with. The smaller it gets, the more detail you can get out of the structure of your model. So if I continue to click and drag, the detail gets finer and finer, and it breaks up the model surface into even smaller polygons as I carve into it. And remember, you can use your number pad keys to pan around or orbit around your object on screen. But this is a pretty cool way to work with a model. Again, if you want to do some very organic editing to the surface of a shape or a form in 3D space, this is a great set of tools to play with. So dynamic topology can help a lot. That's one section you can work in. There's another submenu over here called symmetry/lock on the left. If you go in there, this is where symmetry is already turned on by default when you start using the sculpt tools. By default, the x-axis is locked on. So that's why whenever you start marking on the object, that it starts doing a replicated mark on the opposite side. So if you don't want it to do that, you just have to uncheck the mirror box for the respective axis that's activated. So if one of them's shaded dark, that means that axis is turned on. And you can turn it off, and then you can just start sculpting in individual areas and get some very interesting effects very quickly. And that's kind of the power of working with the sculpting, the basic sculpting options that you have. They're a lot of fun. But each of these sculpt tools is different. Again, if you click on the main icon for your brush tool that you're working with, you can select all from the different tools that are available inside of Blender for changing the way that it adds or subtracts material from your base object. So some of these do very random things, like if you use grab, you can literally grab and pull polygons and groups of them away from the surface. If you use blob, it is what it says it is. If you just start coloring over an area, it will start inflating pieces like a sphere, and you'll start getting inflated chunks of material across the surface. So it's another very bizarre tool, kind of fun to play with. Snake hook is kind of an odd one. This one's kind of fun though. If you want to stretch and grab polygons and twist them out into space, you can literally grab and pull them out kind of like tentacles away from your object. And that's using snake hook. Now, it will pull them out in a straight direction based on your viewport, so you have to kind of be aware of that when you're moving things in 3D space. Always rotate around your object to see what you're doing. Chances are you've been editing at one angle the whole time, and you're just stretching stuff in one axis, which looks a little flat. So you may have to change angles and pull things away in a slightly different fashion. But you can get some very bizarre looking shapes and forms just by using a handful of these sculpting tools in here. Now I pretty well wrecked my model. I'm pretty sure. So again, pay attention to what you're doing with it as you edit. If you don't like what you've done, make sure to always go back using Command-Z or use your history options that are available at the bottom of the Tools tab. Let me see if there's anything else in here I want you to know about related to the sculpt tools. All right. But again, sculpt tools are really great. Again, they are more organic in a sense, so you can work off of basic surfaces to transform them in different ways using those tools. Again, really handy for creating organic elements or even abstract elements in your design very, very quickly. And so that's kind of the basis of what sculpt mode is really, really good for. All right. I'm going to switch back to object mode for a minute. Some other things that I'd like to show that we'll work with in this class that you get to play with are something called modifiers or object modifiers. I'm going to start with just some fresh objects to show you how to do this and play with this tool. So I'm going to go into my outliner panel real quick and turn off some layers temporarily. So I'm going to turn off my cyclorama and my character and probably this crazy cube icon. And I'm going to recenter my view a little bit. Again, if you're trying to recenter your view, you can hold down Shift or Control to pan your screen around to recenter your floor image, the floor grid on screen, so that you can kind of see it. And then you can use pan and tilt orbit features with your number pad keys, as long as your mouse is hovering over your viewport when you're doing that stuff. Okay, but I'm going to add a new object into my scene while I'm in object mode. And I'm going to add the monkey. Drop in the Blender monkey into the scene here. Just kind of position it to where I can see it. All right. So what I want to talk about are called object modifiers. So with whatever 3D object you have selected on your screen right now, look over here on the right, and you should find your Properties panel, which is this panel right below your outliner, and it's got a little strip of icons across the top of it. And there's an icon here that looks like a blue wrench icon. Go ahead and click on that blue wrench. And when you click on it, it opens an option that says Add Modifier. Go ahead and click on where it says Add Modifier, and it will pop up a giant menu that allows you access to all of these different kind of crazy modification tools inside of Blender. I'm not going to show you how to use all of these. Some of these are really complex and require kind of a sort of a collaborative system in here where more than one has to work together to make them work effectively. So I'm just going to show you some of the basics. What's great about modifiers is they don't do permanent damage to your model when you add them to it. It's kind of like working with smart objects inside of Photoshop. These can sort of be considered like smart filters. But here are a few things you can do that are kind of cool. So here's some, the first thing I want to show you is the build feature. So if you find the one under the generate column that says build, click on that, and whatever model you had on screen, you may notice that it may have disappeared, maybe mostly or almost all together, and maybe has just a couple pieces left. The cool thing that build does is it actually allows you to recreate your model on screen piece by piece. So it kind of leaves it sort of halfway shrouded off screen. So to modify it, look under your modifier panel, and now you have options for that modifier that you just added. And so it gives you a list underneath that show what you can do. So let me show you some of the things you can play off of. So number one, it gives you a starting value for the effect to begin on. And it's based on a frame rate, which is kind of interconnected with your animation panel down below. That's this weird bar system below your main 3D menu. This is just your animation playback area. If you ever want to play back, some modifiers work off of that. So if you ever want to see what it's doing, you can actually hit the play button and watch it reanimate your form on screen if you're using build. And that's just using this little play button down here on the lower menu. You can rewind it by clicking and dragging this green line in the playback panel back and forth to watch it rebuild or deconstruct your model. And now it does it in a very organized fashion. I should make that clear. Notice how it builds the model basically from sort of its characterized front all the way to its back is what it's doing, based on the position of the axis for the model. Now we can change it up with some of the options it gives us. Like it gives me a randomize feature, which is kind of cool. And when you do randomize, look at this. Like it literally deconstructs the model in random places. So you can literally have like one of those weird hollowed out forms that we saw when we were looking at the different 3D artists that worked with sort of hollowed out bodies that looked random. You can kind of simulate that with this tool. And that's just by dragging this little playback bar backwards and forwards down below in the animation panel. Kind of cool. Another cool thing about modifiers is you can actually make them additive and stack them on top of each other so that you can have more than one effect applying to an object. But that's how you can work with build. Now I'm going to turn off or delete that modifier. If I don't want it, there's a little X icon listed in the modifier panel that I can click on across from the name of the modifier here. So I'll just click on that to remove the effect. All right, now I'm going to go back into modifiers. I'm going to show you a few more. The next one I'm going to show you, let's do the one called remesh. So slide down to the generate column called remesh. And remesh is kind of unique when you look at its options that it gives you. What it does is it literally reinterprets the polygon structure for the selected model on screen. So mine starts off on the option that says sharp. And if I change the octatree depth level for that, I can change how many polygons it allows in the design to work with the sharp effect. I can also change the scale of the effect by clicking and dragging on the scale value to enhance or de-enhance the effect. If I change it from sharp, I have 3 options that I can actually reinterpret the polygons. So one of them that looks cool is blocks. And if you switch it to blocks, it literally converts your model into like a Minecraft design. And so you can change the octatree depth with that to simplify the model. You can kind of see mine on screen now. It's kind of transformed the monkey. Now I've got Minecraft monkey. But you can change the scaling, and it's adjusting the amount of detail that it renders, and it makes as many blocks as it needs in order to re-render detail. Kind of wild, right? So this can be kind of fun if you're trying to regenerate a model in kind of a base blocky kind of structure. So it looks like it's very stacked together. That does increase the density of your design, and it can make it kind of overwhelmingly huge. A way that you can tell how big your model is while you're editing in Blender, this is important to watch. But up here across the top of your Blender interface, you may see a little Blender icon and then a strip of numbers bracketed off. So you've got a section that says verts, faces, and mine's kind of blocked, but it may also say tries. That tells you how many faces or vertices or triangles the particular object you have selected on screen is made of. Again, my screen is truncated because of the projection conversion, but yours probably you can see all of those numbers listed across the top. And you want to be very careful with how many of those you have, because the more you add in, the slower Blender or your computer will run, or the faster it will crash. So just be aware of that stuff. A cool thing about working with modifiers is you can also turn them off and on temporarily to make them visible inside the little modifier panel. So if you notice over there, it gives you next to the name of the modifier, it might show a camera and an eyeball. And so the camera will turn off the appearance of the option when you make your final render. The eyeball will turn off the appearance of it while you're editing. And that's actually just to help simplify editing while you're going, because while this is turned on, it could possibly leverage too much RAM and memory. So it may be good to leave it off temporarily. Okay, so that's what remesh can do. Kind of cool. I'm going to delete that one. Another one that's kind of fun to play with is called decimate. Decimate literally allows you to reduce the number of polygons in the structure to reduce the overall appearance of the model, sort of mathematically. So you can leave it at 100%, which is normal, down where it says ratio, or you can click and drag on that value slider for ratio to reduce the overall quality of the model until it kind of becomes these really weird kind of just basic polygon structures until it's nothing. Kind of fun. Kind of like the build feature, but it doesn't actually remove pieces completely off the model. It literally changes the way the model appears. Sometimes the decimate feature is good if you need to reduce the quality of the model for the sake of output or editing. Another cool feature to use modifiers for is to actually combine objects together to make new objects. So for instance, let's say I want to take a part of the monkey and I want to carve a perfect rectangular area out of it. So I could actually pop in or add to my scene a cube, and I'm going to scale it down. Probably turn on my quad view to do this kind of edit. So what I'm going to do is basically have this cube positioned to where it's kind of protruding from the head in some way, or carving into the face. And so what I'm doing is just making sure that the cube overlaps the monkey in some sort of way. All right, so I've kind of got it to where it's overlapping now. That's what I need. And what I'm going to do is called a Boolean modifier. This is a typical operation you can access in any 3D software, but it allows you the ability to add, subtract, or combine, or intersect objects that are touching or overlapping. So I'm going to take my base object that I want to, let's say I want to subtract the cube from the monkey. So I'm going to select the monkey, go to Add Modifier, and I'm going to go to the option that says Boolean from the Generate column. And when you pull up Boolean, it gives you two options to set, what the operation is going to be and what the opposing object is that you want the operation to work with. So I'm going to tell it that I want it to do subtraction or difference. And then I'm going to click on the orange cube icon and select from a list the object that I want to cut from it. So I'm going to use cube 001. And what I'm going to do to see what it's done to it, you can't really tell that it's done a subtraction because it likes to keep the original object intact on screen. But you can turn off the original cube by going to your outliner panel and just turning off its eyeball. And now if I go to my monkey, I can actually rotate my monkey around and see what the subtraction method is doing to the object on screen. So it's literally cut a chunk out of the monkey. Now, it hasn't done it for real because it hasn't completely removed it. If I want it to actually remove it permanently, I can just apply the modifier. And now my monkey is literally this carved out section on screen. So I've literally cut away part of it. Now, Boolean operations don't always work. Depending on what you're trying to subtract from another object, the surface may be too detailed or too odd or too chaotic. And you may have to change the way the object is slicing through it to do this kind of subtraction. The other cool thing is you can also do a union between the two objects. So I can literally take like my monkey and union it together. Hold on a second, let me go back to the monkey. Let's do Boolean, union, cube 1, apply it, and let me turn off the old cube. And so now it tried its best to add the cube onto the monkey structure. It wasn't perfect. Like it had a bunch of pieces it wasn't sure what to do with. And so that's why part of the face kind of looks a little weird right now and hollowed out because it just deleted polygons instead of keeping them. And that's sometimes where you have to modify the structure of it to play with it a little bit more or move the object around before you delete. And that's just what a handful of the modifiers will do. If you look under modifier, there are other things you can use. They're kind of entertaining, like the simulate features. You may want to look at a tutorial for it to create. Like fluid simulation is really cool if you're trying to create liquid forms inside of Blender. It does a great simulator for that. As well as doing things like cloth design, like you can actually make the cloth look like it drapes over an object. But again, those are things I'm not going to cover in class time necessarily. But to say that you could play with them and look and see how they work if they apply to your design. They are more advanced, so be careful with the timing for working with those. All right. Last thing that I want to show you today. Another way that you can create 3D shapes on screen. I'm just going to delete this crazy monkey and switch to my normal view for a minute. Another way that you can create interesting shapes on screen is using the curve tools to draw vectors, and then you can actually use them to create a form or extrude a form out of. So I'm going to draw from a top view on screen. To switch to a top view, you can use the number 7 on your number pad to automatically switch your user perspective to a top view. And I'm going to go while I'm in object mode, I'm going to go to my Create tab on the left and go down to Curves. And I'm going to select the basic one that says Bezier Curve. This one works like our pen tool inside of Illustrator. All right, now when you add the Bezier curve, it drops it on your screen somewhere inside of your 3D grid. And it dropped mine right there, so I'm just going to recenter it, grab it, move it with the widget, and zoom in to see it. And so here's my curve. This is a basic curve on screen. Nothing real fancy going on right now in object mode. What I'm going to do, though, is switch it from object mode to edit mode. And when I go into edit mode, it shows me what direction the vector is going in with a little arrow system over the top. It also shows me how many segments it's broken into with how many arrows are across its surface. And it gives me control handles on either end to manipulate the anchor points for the curve, which I can click on and drag or move around if I need to reshape the basic curve that it gives me on screen. I can also grab these little outer handles out here to manipulate them and stretch and pull them to change the reaction of the way the curve is, like to stretch it out, bow it more. Other cool things you can do in here, again, when you're in edit mode, you can also extend the length of objects using extrude, so I can still do that with this. So if I hit E, and move my mouse, it'll pop up a second curve line that I can then use to edit inside my scene. So you can quickly draw like sort of flat 2D forms with this very quickly, which is kind of fun. The more interesting part, though, about working with curves are some of the different options that you can use to edit it. So let me just show you the properties panel for working with curves. So I'm going to convert this into a 3D shape in a second. So after you've kind of drawn something crazy on screen, you can even do it in toggle in your quad view. So if you don't want it to just be flat on the grid, you do need to switch to one of your other views to drag one of those pieces up in the air so that it suddenly has 3 dimensions to it. So maybe it could be like a swirling form that goes up in the air. But with it selected on screen, I'm just going to rotate my screen around into a user perspective. I'm going to go over to the curves icon under my property panel. So it looks just like the curve icon that we used. And this allows you to dictate how the curve is interpreted on screen, whether or not it stays a 2D shape or it can become 3D. And you can also tell it how to work with the form to make it three-dimensional. So here are some of the ways you can do that. So we can adjust it by giving whether or not it fills the object as a half or full rotated object around it. We can also, if you come down here to geometry, we can tell it what resolution to work with and how much extrusion it gets to actually create a form. So here I've started using extrude, and it has started to create a flat ribbon around this form. And that's just by changing the extrude value. And then if I change depth, it will start to round off that form. So right now it's starting to look like a half pipe structure. And resolution just controls the overall quality of that shape. So if you increase resolution, it makes it softer. Offsetting will just shrink and grow it based on the position of the path on screen. Let me see. I've shown you depth, I've shown you extrusion. If you come back up to where it says fill up here, the drop down for fill, now that we have a shape to visually see, you can change this to any one of these. So fill can be back, it can be full. And so when you change it to full, it actually creates a completely wrapped sort of basic circular structure around a pathway, which can be kind of cool. And then you can come back to your other options to adjust the qualities of that particular structure. So you can kind of make these bizarre tube-like forms to work with as a 3D structure. You can still use your other toolbar options on the left to adjust this thing. So if I select like one of the anchor points that my path is made of, I can use things like shrink and flatten to taper the shape and readjust it. So I can create kind of these bizarre forms if I want to. I can still extend my shape into space, so I can hit E and then pull out more tubing if I need to, and adjust it, redirect it, re-angle it. And that's actually a pretty cool tool to use. If you want to make it just a closed shape pattern, you can actually come down in the properties for the curve, and you can turn on where it says cyclic and check the U box, and it will actually close in the shape and reconnect it from beginning to end seamlessly for you, so that you have a continuous form if you want to make like a complete shape. And that's how you can play off of like this particular tool. So again, each one of these features gives you something a little different that you can edit the object to do or to look like. So this can be great for creating snaky looking forms, ribbons, and other odd things that twist and wrap through space based on a basic vector path structure. All right. All right, so that's in terms of just a rundown of modifications that you can use inside of Blender, different shapes that you can add to your scene and generate. And again, transform your shapes to benefit your design. That is a handful of ways that you can do it and play off of. And again, with any of them, working with them is important, is just always going back to basic transformation skills and basic navigation of your windows. The more you learn how to rotate and move your windows around to control your scene, or to be able to rotate an item on screen or scale it on the fly or move it. The more you learn to do those, the easier it will be to move around and work with that model. But that's all I want to cover with this particular demonstration. So we'll go ahead and call it quits on that part, and that'll be the end of this exercise. So again, make sure that you make those kinds of adjustments using those tools with your own model based on your concept design, okay? Using the various tools to modify your work. But that's what you want to end up with when you're done with this exercise, is a model that now resembles the kind of end product based on its form. We haven't touched color, but we'll look at that next time, and working with lighting and the camera. So that's it for now, though. All right.